I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network, joined by Democratic Congressmember Raja Krishnamoorthi. Congressman, welcome to the show.
Ben, great to be back.
So we are now days away from a government shutdown. We have Democrats taking this very seriously, trying to get things done. You have MAGA Republicans saying things like this. I want to show you what Marjorie Taylor Greene said just yesterday, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Play this clip.
You know, we were talking earlier that we didn't feel any effects of the SAG, the actors' strike. Now, we will feel the effects of a UAW strike because automobiles will become not as plentiful. Yeah. People will lose their jobs or lose their income. That's a big difference. But if the government shuts down, let's just be truthful. We're not going to miss it. It's already overexposed anyway.
Well, that's how the American people feel. The people that are affected are federal government employees, but the American people don't miss a beat in their jobs. That's the reality. Now, we can talk about how it affects our ability to fund the government. We're not doing a good job in Washington right now. I, for one, have drawn my red lines. I'm not voting for COVID anything. I'm not voting for Biden's weaponized special counsels. I'm not voting for Ukraine. And I think that's where we should be drawing our red lines. That's where the American people are. Yeah. They're fed up with it. But unfortunately, we're still going to be fighting over those issues. But I think there's a serious issue with these auto workers, Brian. Yeah. We aren't worried about the people protesting in Hollywood.
No.
But between the Democrats' Green New Deal and them going to destroy the auto industry, change it to electric vehicles, these people that are out there striking, their jobs are at risk, and there's nobody to blame except Joe Biden and the Democrats.
Now, Congressman, I'd like to believe and say this is just a fringe person in the Republican Party. Ignore it. It's nonsense. But we see her shoulder to shoulder with Kevin McCarthy. The MAGA Republican Speaker of the House, McCarthy, has put her on major committees, and she has major influence, and she says what a lot of MAGA Republicans are saying. What's your response to all of that?
Well, first of all, I completely and totally disagree with her that people will not notice a government shutdown. This is a huge loser. I don't know if she was in office the last time that we went through a government shutdown, which was in 2018, 2019, which is actually a partial government shutdown of 35 days that Donald Trump triggered when he demanded that his wall be funded. And as you know, the majority of Americans, as represented through members of Congress, said no to that demand, and he shut the government down. Well, what happened? It turned out that millions of people were hurt in the process. Just one example, you had, people at the airports, namely our TSA workers, having to work without pay. You had air traffic controllers working without pay. I think that a lot of people had to go to the food bank as federal employees to make ends meet. You had visas delayed. You had benefits delayed. The Social Security Administration was not fully staffed. It won't be if we have a shutdown going forward. And what's worse about this potential government shutdown, Ben, is that we could have millions of active duty military not getting paid even as they're guarding our country. I totally and utterly disagree with Marjorie Taylor Greene. And of course, that wouldn't be the first time.
And if you can explain to all of our viewers there, I think it's important to mention what you just said. How specifically would this shutdown harm our troops?
Well, you have to understand a lot of these troops aren't making six-figure salaries. They are making wages that, they need to put food on the table, to educate their families, to do all the things that many families do. And they don't have, other means of supporting their family. So when they don't get paid, that's a big problem. It's also wrong. It's just morally wrong and ethically wrong. And we should never do that to any employee. We shouldn't force people to work without pay. But just beyond that, it hurts us in other ways. As I mentioned, all agencies of the government will have skeletal crews, so they won't be able to render the services that they'd otherwise provide.
Now, to me, there's like a gap in seriousness going on Capitol Hill right now. And at a bare minimal threshold, I think we all want members of Congress and senators to conduct themselves professionally, like adults, and take their job seriously and engage in serious discourse, dialogue, debate, and compromise. That's why you're a member of Congress. You are someone who takes the job very seriously and wants to have these serious discussions and negotiate serious outcomes, even if you don't always get your way and there's got to be compromise. On the other side, when I hear people in leadership in the MAGA Republican Party say things like, I've drawn my red line. I'm not going to fund COVID anything. I'm not going to fund Ukraine anything, and anything dealing with the special counsel's office. Well, we're not then having an adult conversation, yet alone getting into the weeds where we should be. What do you think about that?
I agree 100%. Like, I agree that in a democracy and certainly in Congress, we should be negotiating over the details of different measures. But there are certain things that should not be used as leverage. You should not be able to shut down the government when you don't get your way. You shouldn't be able to go into a debt default if you don't get your way. That's the equivalent of strapping on an economic suicide vest and taking everyone down at the same time because you're not getting your way. We don't operate that way. That's not the way adults operate or should operate. And yet, time and again, members of this hard right MAGA extremist wing of the Republican Party are holding us all hostage. But, I have to say, the blame really lies at the feet of the leadership of the Republican Party in the House, for instance, who says that the governing principle or the operating principle behind putting anything on the floor in the House is that it must receive almost unanimous support from the Republican caucus. Well, what you do in that instance, when you have that as your operating principle, is that you give tremendous leverage to that hard right extremist MAGA wing, and that's wrong.
I'll show you. This is from Kevin McCarthy over the weekend. I'll show you what he said, where he basically, I'll play the clip and then I'll ask you the question. Play the clip.
Last week, you said that these holdouts are trying to burn the place down. Do you still feel that way?
Well, if you're holding out now, you're trying to get a person into a shutdown. You've been stopping the bills from ever coming up. I don't know how you stand up and then say, well, he hasn't brought them up. The only reason they haven't come up, they've been out of committee. People have read them. I've been asking for amendments since back to July so we can bring them up. But if you can't pass the rule, it's hard to bring it up. It's almost that they want to walk you into a shutdown, then blame you for the shutdown. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think we should show we can govern, and that's what the majority of us all have been doing. I watch what's happening on the border each and every day because of this Biden administration. I want to secure our border. And I think everybody wants to be able to do that. But if you don't bring the bills up, it makes it very difficult for us to be successful at that.
First question, I want to just address Kevin McCarthy in general. From your vantage point, has Kevin McCarthy lost all control at this point?
Well, he's not in control. He's not in a place where he can kind of thoughtfully operate the House, because he has, as I said, adopted this operating principle where he's given tremendous power to this extremist wing of the Republican Party. Now, he can change things, Ben. He could easily say, look, if you folks are not going to do what is responsible and allow for instance, a clean continuing resolution of the federal budget to go forward with disaster aid and Ukraine aid and so forth, then I'm going to turn to the Democrats and I'm going to ask them to vote for it. He could do that, but he's not. And the simple reason he's not is because he fears losing the speakership if he does that. But that would be the right thing to do. That would be putting the country first, Ben. And that's what we need right now.
And by the way, if he cares about power, if he thinks that what he has now is power, that looked like, I'm going to say it, one of the weakest people I've ever seen who has to be controlled by whatever Donald Trump is going to post on his social media platform or whatever Matt Gaetz is going to say every day. And he's got to listen to Matt Gaetz saying that he's got low testosterone and he's a pathetic human being. I mean, that's what it's come to. Anyway, I want to talk about impeachment
Can I say something
hearings.
about that?
Absolutely.
You know, I think that, for instance, when Speaker Pelosi was the speaker, she would never tolerate that nonsense from anybody, let alone someone from her own caucus. And yet I don't understand how there are no consequences for this nonsense that we're seeing every day from folks who really don't have the best interests of our country at heart when they speak and when they act and when they make these outrageous statements. But right now we have to, Mr. McCarthy, Speaker McCarthy needs to realize he is number 2 in the line of succession. This is not a joke. He is a speaker for the country, not just for one party, not just for one caucus, not for one wing of one caucus. And so he needs to do the right thing. That is to keep the government open. And he can easily do that by working with Democrats today.
And you're right. I mean, he calls himself a leader, that has a title, but every day he lets people like Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert and others just degrade him and humiliate him, and there's no consequences, saying that he's got low testosterone, the most pathetic man alive, and he just sits there and takes it. You're so right. It's like you can never envision a world where a Speaker of the House like Nancy Pelosi would be like, okay, just attack me and demean me every day, and I'll just go about my day, and I'll show up with my vest and say, oh, I don't know why this is happening. It's such a good point.
It is. It's really, I also think about what kind of a model that sets for young people who are watching as well, because they take their cues from these folks when they hear this nonsense. And this is not what we should be teaching our children either, about leadership or about working together or about doing the right thing.
And speaking about what we should not be teaching our children, I'm so perplexed, Congressman. You have a situation now where the leader of the Republican Party in Donald Trump, and that's just who they look up to, says things every day that are so disqualifying. In the past 48 hours alone, he made a post that either expressly stated or at least strongly implied that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, should be executed. And then he writes, to be continued at the bottom of the post. Yet all I hear is the media talking about President Biden's wearing sneakers today and all of these things. Like, from your vantage point, is it that the media is broken? Are they afraid to cover this? Is this overwhelming to them? Like, what's the issue that we can't be like, whoa, red flag, red alert, death threat to our general? Maybe this person should not be qualified to be the leader of a political party.
I think we've become numb to this, these types of outrageous statements by Donald Trump, that perhaps we're almost desensitized to what's going on. So that's one part of me. Another part of me is like, well, we should cover it, but do we want to give this type of attention to those types of outrageous statements? But then a third part of me realizes that there are people who listen to what Donald Trump says, and it would be irresponsible not to talk about how this crosses all kinds of red lines. Let me just say one thing about Mark Milley. He has appeared before various committees that I sit on, including the Intelligence Committee and the Select Committee with regard to the competition with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, where I'm the ranking member. And he's a serious person who tries to do the right thing, and he's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He doesn't deserve this nonsense.
And then finally, what MAGA Republicans are doing this week is they're gearing up for the first set of impeachment hearings taking place. They've listed a number of witnesses. Just even looking at the backgrounds of some of these witnesses are people who also post horrific things on their social media platform. So I'm looking forward to the famous Congressman Krishnamoorthi cross-exams, as well as the cross-exams from other of your colleagues. What should we expect at these hearings? What's going to happen? And I guess overall, what does this just say about priorities here that we're talking about Hunter Biden crap in 2023 on the eve of a shutdown?
It tells you all you need to know about misplaced priorities by the majority. I guarantee you, if you take a poll of Americans and ask them what should be our priority this week, keeping the government open, taking care of their jobs, their health care, their education, or impeaching Joe Biden. Impeaching Joe Biden may not even be in the top 100 at this point of their priorities. Why? Because there's not a shred of evidence implicating Joe Biden in any wrongdoing. Not a parking ticket, not a moving violation, let alone high crimes and misdemeanors. And I've been on this committee, which is, as you know, has become basically the Hunter Biden committee. And I've seen the quote unquote evidence, and there's not a single shred of evidence implicating Joe Biden. So that's one thing. The second is the witnesses who are being brought forward on Thursday are not even fact witnesses. They have no knowledge of anything having anything to do with the alleged wrongdoing committed by Hunter Biden or Joe Biden or anyone. And they are just experts, quote unquote, who are opining on whether they believe that, something wrong happened with regard to the Bidens. So it's not really, going to be very informative, and it's not going to be very enlightening as to, this quote unquote impeachment inquiry.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for your time. I know it's a busy week, at least for Democrats, trying to get things done. I'm not sure I can say the same about your colleagues on the other side, but I hope some of them have the sense to be moderate and to do what's best for the country. But I guess to be continued, and we'll hope you join us again on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben, as always. Thank you for the service that you do in covering these important topics.
Thank you so much. And everybody, make sure you hit subscribe on our YouTube channel as we approach 2 million subscribers, and have a great day.
Hey, Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.